You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. When I was younger, I used to enjoy going to video game arcades. Video games were a thing then. They were pretty recent. Things like Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Frogger. And I used to like to go and play on these games myself. And one of those that I remember was something called Asteroids, which was quite popular at the time. And in the game of Asteroids, what your job was to be the pilot of a spaceship travelling through an asteroid belt in space. Now, your spaceship was depicted as a triangle. The graphics weren't too great back then. And your spaceship, this triangle, was travelling through space and moving slowly towards you with this kind of storm of asteroids. And so your job was to try and traverse your way through. Now, what you did have is you had a little shooter. So on one of the 3 points of the triangle, you could actually fire out missiles. So if an asteroid was headed straight your way, you could shoot at it and break it up in order to escape from it. Now, what would sometimes happen in the game is that as you were trying to navigate your way through, it started to feel pretty overwhelming as the asteroids begin to close in. And thankfully, what it did have was not just a shooter that you could fire at the asteroids, but there was also an additional button that you could use, which was called the hyperspace button. Now, the hyperspace button was essentially an anywhere but here button. And so if you press the hyperspace button, what would happen is that your spaceship would disappear and it would reappear in a completely different place on the screen. And so when you were really overwhelmed with the asteroids and they seemed to be closing in on you, you could just press the hyperspace button and be not here. You'd be somewhere else. The only difficulty with the hyperspace button was that you couldn't actually specify where it was you'd end up. You couldn't just click on an area of the screen that seemed to be the most optimal. You just had to end up where you were given. It was completely random. It was a not here, but it was also a could be absolutely anywhere button. And so sometimes you'd press the hyperspace button as you were overwhelmed by the asteroids, and you'd end up in a worse position than you were in. And so what that tells us is that now sometimes in life we're overwhelmed, aren't we, by these metaphorical asteroids as they begin to enclose on us. And it's easy sometimes just to get into the same kind of let's press the hyperspace button. We just want to be not here. And so we'll make some sort of get out of the way move just to be somewhere that's not here. But just like the hyperspace button in asteroids, when we just have a not here mentality, we're not first looking to see where it would be best that we go in. And so we could be headed in the wrong direction. If the best version of our life is over there and we go in the opposite direction just because it's not right here where we're overwhelmed, we could actually end up being further away from where we need to be rather than closer. And so what if there was a way of having a hyperspace button that didn't actually just take us anywhere, but allowed us to specify where it was that was actually going to be best for us? Now, when I think of that and I think of the changes that we need to make in our life, what you need to do then is to start bringing in some sort of element of design. It's not enough to simply say, I don't want to be here. We have to specify where we want to be instead. And so when it comes to that point, it's helpful to start designing. Now let's imagine that you wanted to build your own house. And let's imagine a truck comes one morning on the plot of land and just empties a whole load of bricks and says, there you go, get on with that. Now, I imagine that even if you're quite skilled at laying bricks, it's going to be quite difficult to build a house, because what you first need to do is you need to bring in an architect and together work out the design for the house. And you'd ask yourself questions like, well, what do I want this to look like? What is it I actually want in this house? And you and the architect would go through these questions together to actually design it. Because that element of design, that sense of building the blueprint of what it is that you actually want, is a key and overlooked part of any kind of change. And that includes personal change as well. Before we can actually get to the point of not just hitting the hyperspace button, but hitting the button that takes us to where we actually want to go, we first need to figure out where it is we want to go. And so we need to do that architect work where we actually design the life that we want. And so in terms of my therapy work, one of the things that I will typically do early on when working with somebody is to be that architect, to help the person really flesh out in some detail the design of what life will look like. And I do this in a very, I've got a system for doing this, which is really, really effective. And it doesn't feel like a system. It feels much more like a conversation. But what I'm doing, much like an architect who will also have a way of doing this, I will help the person map out and build a blueprint for where it is that they want to go and how they want their life to look like, just like an architect would help you with the design of what your building will look like. You see, pressing the hyperspace button only does one thing. It gets you out of the frying pan. But does it put you into the fire? Because if it does, then there's no point in that. And when I was playing my asteroids game, that's often what it would do. And so what we've covered in this particular episode is firstly, looking at the importance of not just escaping from where you are, but identifying where you want to be. Secondly, we've looked at the importance of life design, just as you would design a home or any other building before you actually started laying the bricks down. And thirdly, we've looked at how even in my therapy work, one of the earliest things that I will do with somebody is to help you go through this process in what feels quite a fluid, but also in my mind is a systematic way. So I can be the architect for you in terms of designing the life that you want. For change to be successful, we really need to know what it is that we're trying to achieve. For change to be successful, we can't just have a mindset of anywhere but here, because that could take us to somewhere even worse, or at least just as bad, and doesn't actually fundamentally solve the problem going forward. So if you're looking for not here, what we have to do is answer the question of what is it that we actually want instead. And so just like the architect does, we have to go through that process of really putting a blueprint in place for the kind of life that we want. And so if this has been helpful, please pass this episode on to someone else who might benefit. You can work with me directly one-to-one. I'm Alun Parry. You'll find out more at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And please subscribe to the podcast. It's completely free and it means you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow with another one.